I was pulling the last of the beets from the garden when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, a Toronto area code, but not anyone I knew. I almost let it go to voicemail. My hands were muddy, my knees ached, and I had half a row left before the frost came in overnight. But something made me answer. I don't know why. Maybe 63 years of living teaches you to pick up when something pulls at you. Is this Marguerite's mother? The voice on the other end was young, female, nervous. My chest dropped before she even finished the sentence. This is she, I said. Your daughter's been in an accident. She's at St. Michael's. You should come. I didn't ask questions. I left the beets in the ground, stripped off my gardening gloves, and drove 90 minutes into the city with dirt still under my fingernails. She was lying in a hospital bed that looked too big for her, my daughter. 34 years old, 8 months pregnant, and she had bruises on her face that were not from any car accident. I stood in the doorway of that room and I felt something go very, very quiet inside me. A nurse touched my arm gently. She's stable. The baby's heartbeat is strong. But she's been asking for you. I crossed the room and sat beside her. She turned her head slowly. One eye was swollen nearly shut. "Mum," she whispered, "I'm here." I took her hand. "I'm right here." She looked past me at the door, checking, making sure, and then she pulled me close. Her voice was so low, I had to lean in to hear it. "It wasn't a car accident," she said. "He knows I know." My daughter had been married for 3 years to a man I had never fully trusted. Not because he was unkind, exactly. He was charming, actually. Handsome in a careful sort of way. Spoke well. Laughed at the right moments. Sent flowers on Mother's Day. All the surface things were impeccable, but there was something underneath that I couldn't name. A tightness around his eyes when things didn't go his way. A habit of speaking about my daughter in the third person when she was standing right there. "She's not very practical," he'd say to his fiancée at the dinner, smiling. While his daughter laughed along like it was a compliment. His mother was worse. I'd only met her a handful of times. A woman who wore her money like armor and her opinions like weapons. She lived in a house in Forest Hill that she referred to as the family estate, as though she were English gentry and not the widow of a real estate developer from Mississauga. She had made it clear, in the way that certain women do without ever saying it plainly, that my daughter was not quite what she had envisioned for her son. My daughter had grown up in a small town 3 hours north of Toronto. Her father and I ran a hardware store for 30 years. We were comfortable, but we were not wealthy. My daughter had put herself through university on student loans and her own summer jobs at some. She was brilliant and stubborn, and she had made her own way entirely. And for some reason, in that woman's eyes, this was something to be ashamed of. I had watched it happen slowly. The small comments. Stows. The way my daughter started apologizing for things she had no reason to apologize for. The way she stopped calling me as often. I told myself it was normal. New marriage, new life, new city. I told myself I was just a mother who missed her daughter. I should have pushed harder. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life. In the hospital, after the nurses had gone and the room was quiet, my daughter told me everything. She had found documents, financial records, correspondence, things she had stumbled onto by accident when her husband had asked her to locate a folder in his home office. He had been running money through a series of numbered companies, the kind of setup that looks perfectly ordinary until you know what you're looking at. And my daughter, who had worked in corporate accounting for 7 years, knew exactly what she was looking at. He had been doing it for years before they married. But the scale had changed. He was using accounts she hadn't known existed, accounts in both their names, accounts that would implicate her if anyone looked closely enough. She didn't know if it was intentional, a trap, a precaution, or simply carelessness. Either possibility frightened her equally. She had made the mistake of confronting him, not loudly, not dramatically. She had sat down with him on a Tuesday evening and placed the papers on the kitchen table and said quietly that she needed to understand what she was looking at. He had gone very still. Then he had said something she would not repeat to me in full. But the part she did tell me was this: that his mother knew, that his mother had always known, and that his mother had said, when my daughter's name came up, when the question arose of what to do, that a woman like her should have expected things to go this way, that she had married above herself, that what was happening was, in some sense, what she deserved. My daughter said it with her eyes down. She said it like she was ashamed, and that was the part that undid me completely. Not the bruises, not the fear, not the hospital bed. The shame, that she had absorbed it, that on some level, after 3 years of quiet erosion, she had half believed it. "You do not deserve any part of this," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. Not one word of it. She looked at me. Then she started crying, the real kind, the kind that comes from the chest, and I held her as carefully as I could, and I let her. My son drove up from Hamilton that same evening. He works in construction management, my son. He is 40 years old, and he has the same eyes as his father, who died 7 years ago, and sometimes when he walks through a door, I have to catch my breath. He took one look at his sister, and then he stepped back into the hallway, and I followed him. "Tell me what happened," he said. I told him what I knew. He stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, listening without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Has she called the police?" he said. "Not yet. She's frightened. Of him, of all of it. The financial exposure. He set things up so that she looks involved. She's afraid that if she goes to the police, she's the one who ends up. She needs a lawyer." He said it flatly. "Tonight. Not tomorrow. I know. And she needs to get out of that house." "I know. That too." He looked at me. "Do you have room?" "I have all the room in the world," I said. We didn't move her that night. The doctors wanted to keep her for observation. The baby was fine. Her vitals were stable, but there had been a blow to her abdomen, and they wanted 24 hours of monitoring before they discharged her. I stayed. My son went back to the city to handle some things he wouldn't specify, which I better than to ask about too directly. I slept in the chair beside her bed. Or I sat in it, at least. Sleep didn't come. I spent those hours thinking about the choices I had made and the ones I hadn't. About how many times I had noticed something and said nothing. About how we teach our daughters to be gracious, to be patient, to give people the benefit of the doubt. And how sometimes that patience is exactly what the wrong people rely on. Her mother-in-law had called my daughter's cell while we were in the hospital. I saw the name on the screen. My daughter saw it too and turned her phone face down without answering. I wanted to call that woman back myself. I wanted to say a great many things. But I had learned, over 6 decades, that there is a time for speaking and a time for building something solid enough that when you do speak, it cannot be undone. This was not yet the time to speak. My daughter was discharged the following afternoon. My son had arranged for a car to bring her directly to my house, not back to the apartment in Toronto, not even for her things. That could wait. What couldn't wait was getting her somewhere safe. She had managed to send herself the financial documents before everything fell apart. She had been careful about that much. They were sitting in a personal email account her husband didn't know about, one she had set up using a device at her workplace. She was thorough, my daughter. Even frightened and 8 months pregnant, she had thought clearly enough to protect herself. A lawyer came to my house 2 days later. She was a woman about my age, referred by a colleague of my son's, and she sat at my kitchen table and listened to my daughter's account without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather notebook, asking precise questions at precise moments. When my daughter finished, the lawyer set down her pen. "You understand what you have here," she said. It was not a question. "I think so," my daughter said. "This is significant." She paused. "And the physical assault. You filed a police report." My daughter shook her head. "Not yet. We need to do that, today, if possible. With the medical records from St. Michael's." "He'll say it was a fall," my daughter said. "He already told the first responders it was a fall." "He told the first responders," the lawyer said carefully, "that you fell. Your medical records will tell a different story. Injuries consistent with what you've described are not consistent with a fall. She looked at my daughter steadily. I want you to understand something. You came in here thinking you were the one in a precarious position. Legally, you are not. He is. Significantly so. I watched my daughter's face when those words landed. The way something shifted in her eyes. Not relief, it was too early for relief, but something like the first breath of air after being underwater. The next few weeks were the strangest of my life. My house, which had been very quiet since my husband passed, became something else entirely. My daughter slept in the guest room. My son called every evening. The lawyer communicated through a secure system my son had set up, which I could not fully operate, but my daughter managed on my behalf. The baby came early, not dangerously so, but early. 36 weeks, in the middle of a Thursday night, with my son driving 90 kilometers above the speed limit on the 400, and my daughter insisting the whole way that she was fine. She was absolutely fine. These were just contractions. The baby was a girl. 4 kilograms, which is not small for a baby who came early. Dark hair, her grandfather's stubborn chin, and a set of lungs that announced her arrival to what I am fairly certain was the entire maternity ward. I sat with her in my arms in the hospital corridor. Because they had taken my daughter into a brief procedure and the nurses had said someone should hold the baby, and my son had not yet arrived. And I looked at this small person who had managed to be born into a crisis with absolutely no regard for anyone's timing, and I thought, well, there you are. She blinked at me. It's going to be all right, I told her. I said it the way I had learned to say it, meaning not that nothing would be hard, but that the hard parts would not be the end of the story. My daughter's husband had retained a lawyer of his own by that point. There had been no communication between them directly. Everything went through legal channels. He had, as my daughter predicted, characterized the night she was hospitalized as an accident. He had also, through his lawyer, implied that my daughter's mental state during late pregnancy had caused her to misinterpret financial documents she wasn't qualified to assess. That last part was a tactical error, because my daughter had 7 years of corporate accounting and a CPA designation, and his lawyer apparently had not been fully briefed on this. The financial investigation was handled by authorities my daughter had no control over once Shiva filed her report, which she did, carefully, with documentation, with the guidance of her lawyer, in a way that made very clear she was a witness and not a participant. Her name had been attached to those accounts, without her knowledge or consent. The paper trail, once examined, showed this clearly. His mother's involvement was harder to establish legally, but it was established. There were emails. There were records of wire transfers that had gone through an account in the older woman's name. There were text messages that my daughter's lawyer described, with professional understatement, as illuminating. I was not present for most of this. I was at home with the baby, mostly. My daughter would come back from meetings and tell me what she could, and I would make tea, and we would sit at the table where my husband and I had sat for 31 years, and I would listen. One evening she came home and sat down and said, "The charges have been laid." I looked up from the baby. "Both of them," she said, "him and his mother." I set the baby carefully against my shoulder. "Okay," I said. She looked at me. "That's it? Just okay? What would you like me to say?" She laughed. The first real laugh I had heard from her in months. "I don't know. I thought you'd have more to say." "I've been saving it," I said. Divorce proceedings in Ontario are not fast. I had not expected them to be. My daughter had a family lawyer separate from her criminal matter, and the 2 cases moved along their separate tracks, with the slow certainty of large things that have been set in motion properly. What surprised me was my daughter herself. I had expected. I don't know what I had expected. Collapse, maybe. Or at least a long period of fragility. She had been through something that would have broken a great many people, and she had done it while growing a human being. And the human being had arrived in the middle of it, and I had thought the aftermath would be difficult. It was difficult. But she was not fragile. She was methodical. She was organized. She had spreadsheets. Actuals spreadsheets. tracking legal timelines and court dates and financial disclosures. She had a folder for the baby's immunization records and a separate folder for mortgage documentation on the condo she was going to have to sell, and she approached both with the same careful attention. She was also funny, which I had forgotten. Before the marriage, she had been very funny. Dry, quick, the kind of person who said the unexpected true thing at the exact moment. That had gone quiet in her over the years. It came back in pieces, like a signal finding its frequency again. I watched it return, and I did not say anything about it. Some things you just witness. His mother called my phone once. I don't know how she got the number. She said my daughter was making a grave mistake. She said the family would make things very difficult. She said some other things that I will not repeat because they were ugly and small, and they deserve no more space than they've already taken. I let her finish. It took quite some time. Then I said very calmly, "This conversation has been recorded. My lawyer will be in touch." This was only partly true. I had not, in fact, recorded it. But I had a grandchild in the next room who deserved a grandmother who did not lose her composure over people like this woman. And so I did not. There were no further calls from that side of things. My granddaughter is 3 months old now. She has decided that she prefers sleeping in the morning and screaming between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., which I understand is a personality trait and not a character flaw, though at 1 in the morning the distinction is harder to maintain. My daughter is moving into a rental in the spring, not far from me, close enough that I can drive to her in 20 minutes, and she has already identified a daycare she likes and a park nearby with a good walking path. She has been offered a position at a firm in Barrie that is slightly less prestigious than her previous role and pays her 20% more. She starts in April. She came into the kitchen last week while I was making soup, the old recipe, the one my mother made, the one that takes 4 hours and involves bones from the butcher and is not efficient in any modern sense but fills the house in a way that nothing else does. And she stood in the doorway for a moment. "I need to tell you something," she said. I kept stirring. "Tell me." I spent a long time thinking that being careful meant being quiet, that keeping the peace was the same as being good. She paused. "I don't think that anymore." I turned around. She was standing in the doorway in her socks with the baby against her chest in the carrier, both of them looking at me. My daughter with her still healing eye, my granddaughter with her brand new face, and the afternoon light was coming through the window behind them, and I thought about everything that had led to this moment and everything that still lay ahead of it. "You never needed anyone's permission to take up space," I said. "You always deserved to." She nodded slowly. "I know that now. The soup needed stirring. The baby needed feeding. My son was calling at 6. There was a frost warning for the weekend, and I still had half a row of beets in the garden." I turned back to the stove. "Set the table," I said. "You're staying for dinner."